Welcome to the No Limit, No Boundaries UFO podcast. Veteran UFO investigators Dan Spell and Mike Pinicello take on all aspects of the UFO phenomena with insight and honesty. It's all fair game here. No limits, no boundaries. And now, here are your hosts, Dan and Mike.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's show. This is our inaugural show of the UFO Fact or Fiction podcast. We hope to send this show out at least once a month, sometime during the middle of the month. But if you are not subscribed to our channel, please hit that subscribe button in order to be notified when our podcasts come out. My co-host is Dan Spell, and my name is Mike Pinicello. And we are looking forward to talking tonight about who we are, what we are about as researchers and UFO investigators. And with that, I'm going to turn over to my co-host, Dan.
Mike, we have some really big plans for our show. But first, I need to get the obligatory disclaimer out of the way. Mike and I are both state directors of MUFON in Connecticut and Maryland. But it's important that everybody understands these views are ours and ours alone and do not reflect in any way the position of MUFON. And I think tonight we're gonna get into the history. A lot of people believe that ufology and the UFO phenomenon began with Roswell. It did not, and we're going to talk about that tonight.
And I think that's a great show to talk about. I can't get over how far back sightings go of these UFO phenomena in the sky. They go all the way back to the BC era, and it's recorded in our history. So it's amazing. People often think that there are a recent phenomena that happened around the 1950s and the 60s during the Blue Book eras, but it really goes back much, much further than that.
That's absolutely correct, Mike. I'm looking at the chart we have here. It goes back to 1440 BCE, whatever the heck that means, but it was a long time ago. It talks about people who witnessed a fiery disc floating over their skies. Now, the Condon Committee report, of course, disputed that, but it's one of those ones, that's an indicator, something very long ago that things were in the skies. And then you could just go from there. Want to jump ahead there, Mike? We can talk about 1600s, 1700s.
Yeah, I was looking at the one that's 1566, celestial phenomena over Basel. And is that Basel? Over in Switzerland. A broadsheet published in 1566 depicted numerous sphere objects appearing out of the sun. This event is depicted in a 16th century wood cutout by Samuel Koch. It's old. It always reminds me of that old saying, and I forget who said it, but there is a famous quote where it's advanced technology is often indistinguishable from magic. And you look at some of these sightings that are reported in the 15th century, 16th century. And to us today, we see it as, that's just technology, that's spacecraft. But for them, I mean, can you only imagine what they must have thought when they were looking up at their sky and see these things flying around? I mean, they must have been scared out of their mind.
I bet they were. In fact, that a lot of people probably back then attributed what they saw to magic or sorcery of some type. They're a product of their time, and whatever the religious, if that was in Europe. I know that, in fact, they have the same type of things going on in China, even that far back. So, yeah, you got to wonder what those folks thought.
Yeah, I know that, even today, I think people are still thinking there's some kind of magic to them. And, looking at these other ones, and like the Aurora, Texas one, back in the 1800s, it was a very religious time in the United States, and you can see that here. I mean, the creature or being, whatever you want to call this entity that they found that was burnt to a crisp, they buried him. They gave it a Christian burial. Again, a product of the time. So uh, they only. Yeah, I wonder in 100 years what people would say if they're still seeing UFO sightings. I wonder how they're going to be viewing that. But I think what's interesting about this is that ufology has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, and I'm sure there were people back then that maybe were looking at it the same way we were collecting sightings. Uh, I wonder if that really happened. I wonder if they had their own investigators back then. Maybe people were too focused on just trying to survive.
I think that the peasantry probably didn't have time to worry over it, and the people that had money just turned it over to their church, and that said, "Hey, what do you think?" And it may have been attributed to some religious event, and that has happened over the.
But looking at this chart that you made, what one that you think is the most interesting or compelling that
Oh,
might show something that is otherworldly? I mean,
here's
you
the
can
one.
definitely say that. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I mentioned just a minute ago about the religious significance. There's one, Fatima in Portugal. Thousands of people saw the sun doing gyrations, and then it lowered itself to the earth. Of course, it wasn't the sun, but they didn't know any better. Some people believe that the miracle that people saw there, Fatima, may have
Mhm.
been an alien. There's a lot of writing about that.
I don't know.
It's called The Miracle of the Sun in 1917 over a period of 3 days.
And then, yeah, that could very well be. I know that the church probably has a lot of information on that, and
Oh,
they're not
yeah,
releasing
sure
it.
they do.
I don't know. It's a very interesting sighting, and people definitely believe in it, and they still visit that site today
Yes,
as
they
it's a
do.
pilgrimage location. So,
They surely do.
but I was wondering if you wanted to circle back a little bit to the Aurora, Texas, the report of the airships, because if you what I would found interesting about this particular sighting, and maybe you did or not, is it seems like even though it was like I said earlier, the way the people reacted to it was very much like how you would at that time period. They gave it a Christian burial to get it being this creature, and they looked at it as, but they also looked at it as they didn't look at it as like that thing was an angel or some kind of creature. When you look at the descriptions of this, even the newspaper articles that you pulled on this, it does describe a ship or some kind
Yeah.
of craft, and in a way, it's almost like an early version of the way we investigate sightings today. We see that there's a craft, we see that there's a ship, we acknowledge that these are mechanical, not celestial or heavenly bodies, they're mechanical. Yet at the same time, we don't know their origins. And also at the same time, like there is that hint that it could be ours. And what I mean by that is in today's UFO sightings, we can always say, well, it could be a classified object. It could be a new drone or a new kind of reconnaissance plane or a new kind of fighter plane that the military is creating. And with the case of Aurora, you could say, well, looking back at it, there was early forms of airships being made, specifically out in the San Francisco, California area, that maybe this is something that was actually a humanoid and a human, and that the reason it was burnt to a crisp was it was in a fire and the body was just unrecognizable. So it might have looked like a alien just because of the way it was badly burned. Um, so maybe that's more of a terrestrial explanation. So it seems like it could be the closest thing that's looks like something that is ours, but is misidentified as a UFO. So I don't know.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that a little bit?
I just think that the folks that reacted to whatever that object was, they did it, as in the way that they would know from the lives that they led. Like you just said, they gave it a Christian burial, assuming that creature or human, whatever it was also a Christian. So I don't know that they would have had any knowledge of airships, Mike. What do you think? You think they knew about? That's a pretty, back then was a very rural area.
No, I don't think they knew about it back then, I think. But if you look at, I don't think the people in that town knew about airships, but if you pull the newspaper articles from the surrounding areas, um, especially the newspaper articles from out in California, they do talk about airships being up there. The only thing is, in today's day and age, sharing of technology and sharing information is almost instantaneous with the internet and 5G. Back then, there really would have been no way to share that information of what
Right.
someone out in, Kansas would have seen compared to someone in Texas or California. So you're right, they wouldn't have known. Looking back in 2020 as modern UFO investigators, you could probably say that maybe that most likely was an airship that was maybe on a
Yeah.
test flight.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good suggestion for what really happened. Who knows though?
Mm.
It all depends on the people.
Yeah, that's true. So, what sighting do you find most interesting of the history of
Wow.
UFO sightings in the U.S. and elsewhere?
The most recent one that I really think is incredible was what happened out in Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
The Phoenix Lights. I mean, you're talking about thousands and thousands of people who all at the same time witnessed something pass overhead. So
Yeah.
for me, that's,
And they never.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh no, that's the most, for me, the most interesting case of late.
And I find what's interesting about that particular case is how the military went to great lengths to try and explain it away as flares from
Right.
a training exercise. And then that was I believe that was pretty much debunked by the investigators. Like the timing of the flares and the way the flares came out of the air, the fighter jets didn't
Right.
match up with what they saw. So
Right.
they kind of realized, well, that's not really what happened. So that
Right.
to me
And
also.
if you couple that, Mike, with the testimony of a lot of people who saw this object, I mean, the evidence is pretty solid, at least in that case, that it really happened. Now, what passed overhead in Phoenix? Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know either. I don't think we're ever going to truly know. I guess that's one of the problems in about ufology is we always work in the gray area. We work in that, there's never any hard facts, but there's always facts. There's just nothing ever really concrete. Nothing's hard. It's always open to interpretation and open to, speculation and skeptics can go at it like crazy. And
I was thinking about this earlier, and it dawned on me that in some ways, study of UFOs is like trying to figure out what happened with Jimmy Hoffa. People have been trying to figure that one out for 50 some years, and we still haven't found him. The same thing with JFK's murder. That's going to go on for decades more. But people don't believe what they don't believe what happened. But it's similar that way. Mysteries that may or may not be resolved.
The other similarities between like JFK's assassination and ufology is the government angle to it, because the government has documents that they release, but then they don't release, and they don't say why they release it. So that leads to more speculation, and they release some documents and then they don't release others. Witnesses say one thing and then they say another thing. I mean, so the parallels are the same between both incidences, and even with the Jimmy Hoffa, Yeah, there's all this he said, she said, and it's there and it's there, and oh, his body is there. But so it's if you almost want to say just let all the information go out, just let it all out, and then there won't be anything to hide. Um, and if you have to redact some stuff due to protecting a name or a source, that's fine. But you don't have to release a whole document or redact the whole thing.
Right.
But you can be a little more selective, but get the information out there. That's what I would say is maybe that's would finally bring peace to the issues. But then again, if we did that, you and I wouldn't have a podcast because we'd have nothing to
Right.
talk about.
All right. We'd be talking about something completely uninteresting to us.
That's true. Yeah. So who knows? But what other sightings do you find interesting in the history of UFOs in the U.S. and elsewhere?
Oh, I think there was one in Western Pennsylvania in Kecksburg. An object came down in the 1960s. And it's a classic military involvement, I think, there. Within an hour or two of that object coming down near Kecksburg, the U.S. Army was on site, had cordoned off the area, and was supposedly threatening the locals if they didn't keep their mouths shut. And of course, they loaded up this acorn-sized object on the back of a big army truck and hauled it away. But that one still is a mystery. Could it have been something from the Russians? Could have been China? Who knows?
Well, they say the Russians, if it's the Russian connection, they say it was a Russian satellite that crashed.
Right.
But there is a lot of speculation when you mentioned the acorn that it was the Glock, that the U.S. got from the Germans after World War II, and they fell the German right, and then we instigated Operation Paperclip, and we brought all these scientists over, and that's actually what they took was the Glock, and then we were testing it over here. I find it interesting that the witnesses would say that it's an acorn shape, and that's the exact same shape as that particular German craft.
Right.
And then when you look at the satellites of the Cosmos at the time that the Russians had, none of them look like an acorn. So I don't really see how you can have a satellite that looks more circular to make it look like an acorn. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. How about yourself, Mike? You got any particular cases you want to chew on here?
I think the case that interests me the most is the Foo Fighters of World War II.
Yeah.
And I think the reason is because, the orb sightings back then, we still have orb sightings today. I know, you go anywhere on the internet and you can find cases of people seeing orbs. And, what are they? Are they interdimensional beings? Are they some kind of probe that's like an energy probe? Or are they actual craft where it's just the light of the craft is, what is it? That's what I want to know because they're still around today.
I'm going to just be a little contrary here. Mike, do you think there's any chance that whole Foo Fighter thing was just like the 1940s version of a urban legend? Pilots and crew members would make this stuff up and then see how it spreads? Or do you think it was real?
Well, it's funny you should say that, Dan, because a few years ago, I was actually interested in the Foo Fighters. And I did a little research on them because what I wanted to know specifically was, were they real or were they, like you were saying, urban legend? And what I did is I went to the National Archives, and I didn't physically go to the National Archives, but now with modern technology and the internet, the National Archives are actually scanning a lot of the World War II documents, and they're putting them up on their website. And one of the things you could get from the National Archives is the pilot logs during World War II. And some of the pilot logs from that period and handwritten notes do describe seeing Foo Fighters, orange orbs flying around their craft.
Mhm.
So, had I not seen that on the National Archives scanned document page, I
Mhm.
probably would agree with you that maybe it is urban legend. But they saw something. At least some of them saw
Yeah.
something. And then,
No.
like I was saying again, with sightings still going on today, I kind of wonder.
Yeah, I think based on what you just told me, and there probably is some legitimacy to it. I mean, those young pilots weren't up there to goof off, when they were flying bombing missions. But
Yeah.
maybe
Well,
there
here's the
really is
question
something there. Who knows?
Here's the question for you.
Uh-huh.
This is what I kind of want to connect or try to connect the dots to. Foo Fighters, Bentwaters, the Bentwaters UFO sighting out, and that happened in England in 1980. The witnesses at the time mentioned seeing like a red light moving through the woods, like a red sphere, and of course, the official quote unquote story was they were seeing the light from the lighthouse, right? The red light
Mhm.
from the lighthouse, I think.
Right.
But do you think that was like one of some kind of like orange, like it's not orange, but like an orb, like a Foo Fighter orb? Or do you think it was some other kind of craft that they were seeing? I mean, do you think you could connect that to the Foo Fighter story, or is it? I mean, it seems like there is some separate parts to it, but I'm just curious to what your thoughts are.
Well, I had thought that what happened there was a real honest to God UFO landing until I read a book by Jacques Vallée in which he talks about that very case. And Mike,
Mhm.
he is of the opinion that the military itself has set up a test using a type of an unmanned drone type of craft with floodlights, with fog machines, and some of their own military personnel as a test to see how personnel at that base would react to an intrusion. And that's what Jacques Vallée wrote. But who knows? Now I'm not so sure what it was over there.
Well, what was his evidence for saying that it was a test? Was it just his opinion, or did
No,
he like have
he
a?
gave reasons. It wasn't just his opinion. It had to do with counterintelligence people and filmmaking people, as Jacques Vallée knows. In fact, there's probably an Air Force memorandum about it. I'll have to double check my book, but he pretty much laid to rest any UFO landing there. But if you see later interviews with some of the personnel who were there in England, they won't say that. They won't say that it was a training exercise. They believe they saw a craft, but it wasn't a drone.
I have to check out that book you mentioned by Jacques Vallée. He's an excellent researcher, so I don't doubt his credibility and work. But I did see Holton give a live lecture, and
Right.
he truly believes what he saw. And the question is why hoax him? I get the
It wasn't a
counterintelligence
hoax.
parts.
They needed unaware personnel, which was the security police and the colonel apparently were not aware that this was being done by the people, whoever it is in the Air Force that does that type of training. They wanted to gauge the reaction of the personnel. Maybe training isn't the right word, but it was an activity, an experiment on how security people would react. But I'll get you the name of the book. That way you can,
Yes,
if you want to
please.
read it.
I think this would be a good podcast for us to talk about in the future. We'll go over this book because I've always said Bentwaters is probably one of the better documented cases. I mean, Holt's letter to
Uh-huh.
the command detailing what he saw, uh, the audio tape that he made, the witness testimony, the
Right.
even the landing uh, impressions they made.
Yeah.
So
You're
that's
absolutely right.
interesting.
That Dr.
Yeah.
Vela's book was a real eye opener. I had no idea that anyone had that, that hypothesis.
I wonder if Nick Pope has a different view on that. He is probably the expert on that particular
Sure
sighting.
is.
Hmm.
Don't know.
Well, I don't know either, but I mean, definitely there are some great cases in UFO history that shows something is going on in our skies, and it's not all just man-made. But now we throw in the U.S. government counterintelligence aspect to it. But it's funny you should say that, and it's interesting that you bring that up because I read a book. It's called Area 51 by a woman named Annie Jacobson, and she's an excellent author. If you haven't read any of her work, I would suggest reading some of her books. She is very, very thorough in her research, and she was talking about how so often that the government uses the UFO phenomenon in order to hide their own classified craft. Because what better way to hide something than to say, "Oh, it's a UFO," and people think, "Oh, you're wacky," and that's not really real, so they dismiss it. Meanwhile, they have their classified objects being tested in the sky, basically right in front of everyone. And so, yeah, I guess that makes sense that the counterintelligence would be involved in it to dissuade anyone from trying to figure out the truth of what's going on at a
Sure. I think
particular
it's
test site.
a very effective way to do that.
Mhm.
You're not discounting that the people are seeing something, but of course you don't want them to know what you're testing. So you say, "Yeah, yes, ma'am, that was a UFO you saw."
Yeah,
Yep, and
and
it's a brilliant strategy, actually, if that is in fact true.
yeah, it's true. It is, and I think maybe that might be one of the reasons why, when the government is pushed into a corner, and to answer what do you know about ufology? What if you know about UFOs? They're a little cagey on it. Even that report that came out in this past June, June of 2021, it was like it was 13 pages, I think. And then if you get rid of all the blank space, it probably came down to like 9 pages.
Right.
And it really didn't tell you anything.
No,
But
in that report, you have to read between the lines because it's not going to jump right out at you and say, "Yes, they're here."
yeah,
But if you read between the numbers, and you can infer a good bit.
but
They
you
couldn't
also, I
just-
think,
they couldn't just come out and say it the way we want them to. They just won't do that. So they have to weasel word it, and then you have to infer.
well, that's true, but I think what it also does is it stokes the fire and keeps this ambiguity in the field,
Oh,
which
yeah,
probably
it
works
does.
more
It
for
does.
them too. So,
Uh-huh.
so it's we're all playing this little game around the truth, this little dance, a very choreographed dance, you kind of would say, but
Mhm.
that's almost a dance. But yeah, well, we'll have to just wait and see. We'll find the truth on this podcast. Give us enough episodes. We'll find it.
Well, we'll do our best at it.
So what other?
Let's see. Cape Girardeau, Missouri, took place
Oh, good.
just a little bit before Roswell. And most people, unless you're really into the UFO field, don't even know about it.
Why don't you give
Same-
everyone a little synopsis of it? Because I
Well-
don't think anyone listening might not know about it either.
It's very similar to Roswell. An object came down not far from Cape Girardeau, Missouri, which is along the Mississippi River. And there was a body involved, but I guess the main thing for me is why everyone thinks Roswell's the big one, but it isn't. Cape Girardeau is right there with it.
There's some good ones. And anything ever come of that? A lot of research done into that? Or is it just kind of
it's documented well enough. It just doesn't get the airplay, It's not as cool as Roswell.
And what do you mean by cool? What do you is it because
in the mind of the UFO community, really? The average person knows about Roswell, but they don't know about Cape Girardeau. That crash took place, by the way, in 1941.
And where did they bring the debris for that? Was it also over to Wright-Patterson Ridge?
I'm still trying to get to but down in a field west of Cape Girardeau Airport, between Cape Girardeau and Chaffee.
I have to look into this a little bit more. I don't know much about this one myself either. I do know that being in this field for very long, you are right that most ufologists don't even address it as being on their radar, let alone something they'll even allege happened.
Right. Yep.
But when you Google it, there is a lot of articles on it.
There is. It's just not as big as Roswell.
I think Missouri had a UFO flap a few years ago of a lot of triangle sightings, if I remember correctly. That made the news. I wonder why the aliens like Missouri.
The only thing I can figure, and there's another one involving national park out there, a lot of it is remote, but Cape Girardeau is not remote. I mean, it's a town, but I'm not sure exactly. It could well be if these are in fact some type of craft they just needed to land for a while, or they had a malfunction and went down.
And they recovered alien bodies from this as well.
I believe so, yeah.
I wonder if this is one of the craft that, if you believe in Bob Lazar, when he said that when he went to S4, there was multiple UFO crafts there in the hangar. I wonder if the craft from this particular UFO site event was one of the ones that were there.
Yeah, I'm looking at the news report here. Reverend William Huffman stated he was surprised to see a disc-like saucer embedded in the earth. He could see foreign symbols and shapes scrolled around the interior of the object. Yeah, it said multiple bodies of crash victims.
Now, one report says there were 3 entities there.
Yeah, that could be.
Now, there was at Roswell, there was 3 entities or 4?
I'm not sure exactly of the number.
So I wonder I guess my question is you have that sized craft, and if both had 3 or let's just say 3, that might be a standard configuration for what they have on their, a pilot, a co-pilot, and maybe a commander or something, or a navigator, or communications officer. I don't know. But if you think about how our aircraft fly with a certain number of crew, and each crew member has a function, makes sense that they would have something similar in the way of how they organize their flight operations.
To control the craft, and also they probably have a science officer on there too. If they're
their own Mr. Spock.
Yeah, exactly. If they're getting samples or testing things, they would want a science officer.
That makes sense. So you have a pilot, a co-pilot, and a science officer. Yeah,
Right.
that would make a logical sense in the way that they would organize a
Mhm.
party on us. Well, I tell you, this is interesting. There's so much out there, and then of course you have the um, Canadian UFO Roswell, the their USO. You know, that was always an interesting sighting.
Is that the
Uh,
one that was in Nova Scotia?
yes.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And they never did find it, or were not able to figure out what it was, but a lot of people saw it.
Yep.
Land it, seeing it from the dock or the land, and also when they went out on boats, they could see it underwater.
Yeah, and the military was heavily involved with there, so you know that they have a lot of records on what transpired.
Sure.
So I always think that that's probably the best evidence that something big is going on. When that's why I going back to Kecksburg,
Yeah.
they clamped down on that area so quickly, like you were saying earlier, that you kind of wonder um, if it wasn't something, if it was something a little mundane, they wouldn't be there that quickly. So whatever it was, they definitely um, wanted to make sure they controlled that scene, and the way they did certainly demonstrates that there was more to that than what they're telling us.
There
And
absolutely was. We don't know, and maybe we never will, but I can't imagine that many people in a small town would make up a tall tale. One or two people maybe would try it, but not a whole town like that.
and the sightings are always the descriptions by the witnesses are all similar. So you're telling me that a whole town would get together and then what, say, hey, this is the story we're going to tell? I find that far-fetched. So I think what
Exactly.
they all did see it, and they're just telling you what they saw.
Yep.
But well, it's still interesting, and I'm still excited to see what develops in the field. Looking at what we have today, going into today. I know we'll talk about this a little more in future podcasts, but the triangle sightings, those things keep popping up everywhere. And but what was interesting, and when I was looking at the research for tonight's podcast, I didn't see many triangle sightings in the past, like in the BC period, or even like the early 1800s.
Right.
It seems like the shape of the UFO sightings from the BC era to the modern has almost evolved. So you kind of wonder, well, one is like how our technology changes and evolves over time. Did the alien technology evolve over time too? Are they like, BC was alien spacecraft design 1.1 and then 2.2, and or does it just show you more that as more modern times come, that maybe um, the sightings today are more our technology than it was their technology? So which would mean, is the true way to investigate ufology to look at the ancient past? Maybe the ancient alien theorists have the right idea when approaching the field of ufology, that you can't look at ufology today because it's too muddled in what's our technology, what's their technology. But in the past, like the BC area where we didn't have flight, we didn't have any kind of advanced technology other than the basics, horse and carriage, or even some societies didn't even have a wheel at the time. Is that really how we're going to have to prove that UFOs are visiting our planet?
Well, I think that the UFOs, assuming they are a real thing, display themselves to people differently. Like you mentioned, in the 1800s, they may have presented themselves one way, and of course now we're far more technology oriented than we were back then. So they're going to show themselves the way as something we would understand, at least to a degree.
So they purposely. So your hypothesis is that they will present themselves in more of an angelic like form in the past because that's what people would understand a little better.
Yes. Yeah, because what would a guy in 1500, if he saw a black triangle, I don't even know, what would that mean to him? But if you showed him something else, I don't know, maybe he could relate it to something biblical, like a chariot in the sky. There's always those that have been reported, especially from long ago.
That's definitely a possibility. I mean, that makes sense. And it'd definitely be a way like that they would want to interact with us, that we would not be scared.
Right.
So yeah, makes sense. So then I guess I'm kind of curious now, taking that further, as humans advance and we become more evolved, I wonder how they're going to be interacting with us in 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years from now. Hopefully by then we'll have disclosure, but if we don't, I wonder how we would be able to view them. Would they be mechanical, or would they be back to more spiritual in nature, like orbs or angelic? Because we're, as a society, starting to move towards that with the metaverse now,
Right.
with multi dimensions and quantum theory, and all our physics is moving towards that field of more energy based movements. So maybe that's what the Foo Fighters are. Maybe that was their early attempt on showing us more energy size type of view on things.
There's a theory out there that what, at least some of what we're dealing with, is not ET from another planet, another solar system, but actually a higher consciousness than what humans have. And they show themselves differently, not by crafts, but through other ways. But my question, I guess, to those people, Mike, would be, if they're that powerful at the consciousness level, why would they need a spacecraft to traverse the universe? It doesn't fit somehow to me. Why they just couldn't travel from planet to planet using their consciousness? Why would they need a spacecraft?
Maybe there's different levels of ET advancement. Maybe some are at the point where they can travel through consciousness, or through opening a dimensional portal with their mind and walking through it into ours. And maybe there's others that are still
right,
more physical beings that need a craft of some kind.
Right.
And I guess that,
what just popped into my head was the Skinwalker Ranch, as we were talking about real objects like UFOs, and then the unconscious or subconscious stuff that's supernatural that's going on out there. Because they have seen what they call UFOs, and they've also had poltergeist-like activity out there. It's like a gathering place for weird stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think of it like, I agree with you. I mean, Skinwalker Ranch is a hodgepodge of different things. They have all kinds of weird things going on there. But if you look at the way the universe is, and how old the universe is, and how society and how planets are created, evolve, and then are destroyed, like humans are built from the remnants of stars. So
right,
we could have societies all over the galaxy at different stages of evolution. It's very possible right now there's a Stone Age society in a galaxy, or a star only a few light years from us. So
I think that's a
let's say,
pretty good bet. I bet there is.
yeah. So I think the ETs coming to us probably are in the same position. All of them are at different stages of evolution, and then you kind of wonder where do they interact with each other, and that goes down the rabbit hole. Do they have like the Galactic Federation and all that? I mean, that's a topic for itself. But
right.
Should we begin our show wrap up now, Dan?
Sure. Why don't we do that? Folks, over the next few weeks, Mike and I are going to be talking about some very interesting UFO related topics. Next week, we're going to talk about the United States Space Force and the rumors that are out there that the United States had or has a totally separate secret space force. So that should be an interesting discussion. Really looking forward to that one. Then after that, we're going to be talking about next episode, TR3B alleged, and the black triangles that people have been seeing in the sky. We're going to talk about what they might be. Are they a U.S. military project, or are they something otherworldly? And then on the week after that, we're going to talk about the legendary presence of Nazis and UFOs down in Antarctica, including a supposed battle that took place there between the United States Navy and I believe UFOs. And folks, if you enjoyed our show, please remember to hit that subscribe button down there. And if you have any comments or questions, we always welcome them. Please send us emails anytime you want.
Thank you and good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.